Hey guys, how are all of you beautiful people? Hope all you are doing fine. This is the next part of Magus of the Wizarding World. So let's start without any delay. Chapter 41, A Short Trip. Saturday, the 22nd of June, 1991. It's been a few days since Matthew returned to London with the Hogwarts Express. His parents were happy to see him. The last few days he didn't do much besides training and testing if his trace was completely gone. After all, he still had a warning free to use at the ministry. He didn't care if they noted that down in his files. Since the ministry would be of no consequence for him at some point in the future. So he first tried a simple levitation spell with his wand. For a few minutes nothing happened. Afterward he tested a few larger spells out in his room. His trace was really completely gone. There were luckily no extra tracking devices placed in the homes of Muggle-born students. They probably didn't believe someone could remove the trace, especially a Muggle-born. Which would be actually hard since Matthew only managed it at this point in time with the help of his new runic language. Today was an important day for Matthew. It's the day when the Harry Potter canon truly starts. According to his knowledge of the books had Dudley's birthday, and the Dursleys would take Harry with them into the zoo. The zoo they are visiting is the London Zoo, the world's oldest scientific zoo, and the only one with a reptile house in the vicinity of London and Surrey. The zoo not only had the zoo a non-magical part. At some point after its opening in 18,218 the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures at the British Ministry of Magic sanctioned the establishment of a Magi-zoology wing to be hidden in plain sight at the zoo, in accordance with Clause 72 of the International Confederation of Wizards Statute of Secrecy. A Magi-zoology wing open for Magical to visit. Although he wasn't really interested in magical creatures, it was worth a visit. But the main reason for his zoo trip was obviously Harry. It was the first chance for him to leave a positive impression on him. He had no interest in being a part of the Golden Trio or bringing himself so recklessly into danger like they so often did. But giving Harry a few times a helping hand or tip, and just being friendly to him would bring him the assistance and friendship of the boy who lived and the Potter family, and later also the Black family through Sirius Black. Matthew arrived early in the morning in the northern part of the Regent's Park, where the London Zoo was located. He spent his morning exploring the Magi-zoological wing of the zoo since he only knew where Harry and the Dursleys would appear after lunch. The entrance to the magical part of the zoo was hidden behind a wall. Like the entrance to platform 9¾ he had to walk through into that wall and he would come out in an older-looking part of the zoo. It was at least 80 years out of fashion, with old lampposts and steel cages for the magical creatures. He was able to see many different magical creatures here, but at most mid-sized ones and below XXXXX classification. Since large ones like dragons or very dangerous ones like Nundus or chimeras were too risky to keep in the middle of London. If an accident would happen, it was impossible to cover up with that many possible deaths. But there were still many interesting creatures to visit. He already knew hippogriffs and unicorns from Hogwarts. They had some Abraxan and Pegasi there. And smaller creatures like Nifflers, Pixies, Murtlaps, and more. The interesting ones were a Runespo, a large three-headed snake. Matthew was pretty sure that it was arguing between its heads, and a Zuvu, an elephant-sized 5-colored cat that originates from China. It was a large feline-like beast with a striped body, scraggly mane, 4 fangs that curled out of its mouth, long sharp claws, and a disproportionately long, ruffled multicolored tail. Zuvus were incredibly powerful and fast, capable of traveling 1,000 miles in a day. Unfortunately, all the magical creatures were behind the steel cages imprisoned by ward schemes, so he couldn't gather any materials or DNA probes from them. He could only scan them with the help of Sarah and collect some basic data on them which he added to his database. As lunch approached, he left the magical part of the zoo and returned to the public part. After a quick lunch from one of the food stalls, he entered the reptile house, where soon Harry and the three Dursleys with Dudley's friend Piers should arrive. It was cool and dark in there, with lit windows all along the walls. Behind the glass, all sorts of lizards and snakes were crawling and slithering over bits of wood and stone. Matthew had to wait a while before a group of people entered the reptile house. First was a pair of adults, a big, beefy man with a large purple face. He had thick, dark hair, a bushy black mustache, with hardly any neck and mean little eyes. This was obviously Vernon Dursley. Together with him walked a thin, blonde-haired woman with nearly twice the usual amount of neck and large pale eyes. His wife Petunia Dursley. Before they ran two boys, one being scrawny with a face like a rat. This was Dudley's friend Piers Porkis, who always follows his lead. The other boy was very fat. He looked a bit like a pig in a wig. He had watery blue eyes and thick blonde hair. This was obviously Dudley, who loudly exclaimed that he wanted to see huge, poisonous cobras and thick, man-crushing pythons. The pig boy instantly found the largest snake in the place and hurried to its window, where he pressed his fat nose against it. Behind the group trailed a small and skinny boy. He wore oversized clothes which made him look even smaller and skinnier than he really was. The boy had a thin face, knobbly knees, black hair, and the brightest green eyes Matthew ever saw. He wore round glasses held together with a lot of Scotch tape. On his forehead, he could see a thin scar in the shape of a lightning bolt, or like one particular rune symbol, the Soilo. Soilo stands for sun and represents victory and protection. This was obviously the boy who lived Harry Potter. It was obvious that he did keep his distance so the Dursleys would forget that he was even there and he could enjoy a day in the zoo without troubles. Even Matthew was angered by the unnecessary underfed state of Harry, while the fat boy had too much. Harry watched the Dursleys as Dudley complained that the boa constrictor wasn't moving and Vernon multiple times hit against the glass. As Dudley shuffled away with "This is boring," Harry moved in front of the tank and looked intently at the snake. The snake suddenly opened its beady eyes. Slowly, very slowly, it raised its head until its eyes were on a level with Harry's. And it winked at him. Sarah, begin recording and scanning everything that happens between Harry and the boa constrictor. Create a new file with the title Parcel Tongue, ordered Matthew mentally, who stood a few windows away, but still in hearing range of Harry and the snake. He had a good view of both of them. As Harry looked around if someone was watching, he pretended to watch the reptile in his window. Harry began to communicate with the snake in hissing sounds. Parcel tongue. Matthew recorded the whole event. Since he knew the exact text from the books, he should be able to create a translator with enough data. Chapter 42, Parcel. Suddenly there was a loud and annoying shout behind Harry. It was Dudley's rat friend Piers Porkis who sneaked behind Harry. The deafening shout made Harry and the boa constrictor jump. Dudley. Mr. Dursley. Come and look at this snake. You won't believe what it's doing. Dudley came waddling toward them as fast as he could. Out of the way, you, he said, punching Harry in the ribs. Caught by surprise, Harry fell hard on the concrete floor. What came next happened so fast no one saw how it happened. Well, almost no one. Matthew could clearly see it. 1 second. Piers and Dudley were leaning right up close to the glass. The next, they had leaped back with howls of horror. Harry had a shocked look on his face as he sat up. The glass front of the boa constrictor's tank in a nice burst of accidental magic had vanished. The great snake was uncoiling itself rapidly, slithering out onto the floor. People throughout the reptile house screamed and started running for the exits. As the snake slid swiftly past Harry, Matthew, who was also approaching the boy, could clearly hear the snake hiss something to Harry before it also left the reptile house. The keeper of the reptile house was in shock. "But the glass," he kept saying, "where did the glass go?" Matthew arrived in front of Harry while everyone else was still distracted or in panic. He stretched his arm out to help the thin boy up. "Nice to meet you, Harry," began Matthew with a smile. "That was a wonderful little trick you pulled there. I think we will meet each other soon again. See you on the train," whispered Matthew to Harry as he helped the boy to his feet before he left the reptile house while acting mysterious. While Harry stared at his back and wondered who he was, and how did he know his name. The group of the Dursleys were led by the personnel of the zoo to the office of the director, while Matthew left the zoo discreetly since he had enough of animals for one day and he accomplished everything he wanted. Scene break. After he returned home, he let Sarah analyze the collected data about Parseltongue. With the help of his knowledge from Canon, the AI could create a pretty accurate translation of the conversation. This would serve as a first basis for the dictionary. In the next few days, Matthew spent a lot of time outside looking for different garden snakes. He tried to communicate with them by using his limited vocabulary and gaining new data into Parseltongue. If he could become a Parselmouth, everything would be much easier, but at the moment he had only a few theories of their origin. One of the books he collected described the different magic users around the world, among them in India, where Parselmouths were apparently common, which is only a half-truth. Although they can communicate with snakes, it is a form of hypnosis and mind magic, by sharing and reading their emotions. This was commonly seen as Parselmouth in Europe, which isn't the truth. This would also explain why the Patil twins reacted the same as the rest of the Hogwarts students when it came out that Harry was a Parselmouth during the events of the Chamber of Secrets. Since both of them knew the difference, and most Parselmouths in Europe were historically rather dark. In reality, in recent centuries there was only one line of known Parselmouths, and Harry isn't related to them. The Gaunt family, who died with Morfin Gaunt as the last official member, based on the information of the Harry Potter books and the history books Matthew read, they always had a deep connection to snakes, which is proven how they only communicated in Parseltongue with each other. The last living, well at the moment half-living member is Voldemort, who framed his uncle, who died then in Azkaban. The Gaunt line descended from the Slytherin line, another family deeply connected to snakes. Sorlaser raised even a basilisk, the deadliest snake in the wizarding world, which was currently sleeping under the castle. Based on all the information he gathered, basilisks and Parseltongue seem to be connected through history, but there is another piece of magic connected to them. Everything about them originates from the oldest known Parselmouth in the history of the wizarding world. A dark ancient wizard by the name of Hippo the Fowl, who lived over 2,000 years ago. For his depravity he even had a chocolate frog card. Hippo the Fowl lived in ancient Greece and was known as one of the darkest wizards in the history of magic. It is rumored that Hippo the Fowl was one of Sorlaser Slytherin's ancestors, with it also Voldemort. He was infamous for being a pioneer in the field of the dark arts, becoming the first known wizard to create the basilisk, and he also spoke Parseltongue. But what if he wasn't born with the ability like every one of the Slytherin and Gaunt lines? What if he was the first Parselmouth? Matthew came to that conclusion because of another crucial piece of information, that at the moment only he knew. Harry spoke Parseltongue and he was a Horcrux. He would lose that ability the moment the Horcrux was destroyed, which was confirmed by Rowling in Matthew's past life. Hippo the Fowl spent his life studying the dark arts, inventing many vile curses. At some point in his life, after much experimentation, he created the first known basilisk and additionally gained a deep understanding of the nature of the soul. Armed with his knowledge and ruthlessness, he deliberately committed murder with the intention of splitting his soul, and subsequently sealed it inside an object or living being with dark magic, becoming the first known wizard to successfully create a Horcrux. What if he didn't use an object as a container for his Horcrux but the basilisk he created, which was an unprecedented feat of magic? A kind of magic nobody really studied deeply before, and maybe through the connection with his basilisk's soul, he gained the ability to communicate with snakes. That ability may have integrated itself so deeply into his soul, that it became a bloodline which he passed on to his descendants. For now, Matthew had no way to confirm his theories, but they sounded too plausible to be a mere coincidence. If Harry made a child while carrying the Horcrux, it may also have the ability to speak with snakes. This would be a topic that required more data in the future. Learning Parseltongue through translation was just too hard. A few single words or sentences are possible, but more is a very hard task even with the assistance of an AI chip inside his mind. On a side note, next week Matthew would have again to attend exams for his non-magical education. He finished all the homework his parents sent him to Hogwarts with the help of Morgana and was pretty much ready for it. The 8th year curriculum wasn't much of a challenge for him. History was mostly about ancient British history, a bit Arthurian legends which were actually interesting. Learning the non-magical perspective of Merlin and Morgana Le Fay was pretty funny. He also spent some time scanning all the science books inside the public library. It only took him about 2 weeks, since the library was smaller than Hogwarts. Although the few hundred science books gave him a good foundation for his further scientific studies and research. They proved useful during spell creation, like for his hexagonal shield charm. Chapter 43, Polyjuice Potion. Originally Matthew planned to improve the Polyjuice Potion recipe during his summer holidays, so he could use it to disguise himself during his future planned adventures. Unfortunately, Sarah didn't have enough data on the workings of the original potion to efficiently improve the potion. She could manage it, but it would take a few months. The Polyjuice Potion was a potion that allowed the drinker to assume the form of someone else. It was a highly complicated, challenging, and time-consuming potion that even adult witches and wizards struggled to brew correctly. The potion was incredibly advanced and had 2 separate parts that contained steps for each part. When its brewing was complete, the potion had to be stewed for a month before using. It could last for 10 minutes to 12 hours with its original recipe, based on how good it was brewed. While it could account for both age and gender, Polyjuice Potion could not be used for a human to take an animal form, nor could it be used on non-humans or half-humans. On a side note, that also meant Fleur, her sister Gabrielle, and probably also their mother were humans with Velar genetics, and not actual Velars, since they were considered half-humans. Which created another question: how do Velars reproduce if all members of their race are female? Since a Velar and a human produce a human with Velar genes, it couldn't be that way. Another question Matthew could research if he became bored and had the opportunity in the future. The recipe for the Polyjuice Potion could be found in Most Potent Potions, which was a book inside the restricted section of the Hogwarts library, which Matthew luckily already completely scanned with the help of his scan spell. But even his vast database of knowledge, magical and non-magical, wasn't enough to create an improved recipe in a short amount of time. Sarah's database missed unfortunately data about the actual effect of the potion on the body, Also recording and analyzing the actual brewing process would be also useful. Unlike beautifying potions, which change small parts of the body or even just glamour them, the Polyjuice potion remodeled the whole structure of the body, be it flesh, bones, skin, eyes, and hair color. He also wished he would have access to a thermic cycler or a DNA probe, so he could test if the potion would actually change the DNA of the human. But unfortunately, he was just a normal student. His mother couldn't just give him access to the hospital equipment since it cost a ton of cash, he asked her already. This kind of testing had to wait until he was older. Maybe if he would go study in a university after Hogwarts, he would gain access to this kind of equipment. Or he could try to reproduce them with magic, through runes and enchantments. But for now, he had to use the resources he had. After ordering ingredients from Sloane personally, who pulled some strings for him since some of them were a bit restricted, for actual potion masters or people who needed to work with it, he began the 1-month-long brewing process while letting Sarah record it. First, he had to add 3 measures of fluckweed to his brass cauldron. He used a brass one because that would shorten the brewing a few hours overall. After adding 2 bundles of knot grass, he stirred 4 times clockwise. Now he waved his wand over the potion and channeled his magic. It needed now to brew for the next 68 minutes. He used the short break to train a bit in his martial arts technique, but recently he felt he hit a bottleneck in his progress. Maybe he needs some actual experience in using his techniques than just repeating them perfectly and integrating them into his muscle memory. It was probably time to seek a local mixed martial arts school where he could spar with other martial artists. After practicing for an hour, Matthew returned his attention to his brass cauldron. After it changed its color exactly 68 minutes later, he added 4 leeches 2 measures of crushed lassoings to the cauldron. Now it needed to heat for 30 seconds on low heat before he once again waved his wand while channeling magic through it. This completed the first stage of the potion. After that he added 3 measures of boomslang skin and 1 measure of fine powdered bicorn horn. Now it needed to heat for 20 seconds on high temperature before again channeling magic through his wand. Next, thanks to his brass cauldron, it only needed to brew for 18 hours. The next day he added the last few ingredients before the second step was also complete. Now it just needed to brew for the next 21 days, while Matthew needed to stir it regularly. While the potion was cooking, Matthew didn't do much besides completing his non-magical exams and visiting the local library. Well, he visited a local dojo a few times, to gain some experience. Although he could beat the students similar to him in age, and a bit older. The students quite a bit older, especially the ones of a higher rank, beat him quite easily. But he gained valuable experience which helped him improve his technique by leaps and bounds over the next few weeks. During this time the potion progressed perfectly. Sarah could gather valuable data on the changes of the magical energy particles inside the potion, while it more and more changed its muddy brown color. The constant heating bound the chaotic elements inside the potion to a stable concoction, while the harmful elements evaporated into the air. After 3 weeks of brewing, the potion was finally ready to be split into multiple doses. All they needed for usage was a part of the person he wanted to change into. He gathered different adult hairs during his visits inside the dojo, while nobody was watching. Fighting made people lose a lot of hair. He added a hair to his first dose of Polyjuice potion and ordered Sarah to record everything. The potion changed from his brown muddy looking color into a dark steely one. It smelled now a bit like metal and wood. After observing the potion, he gulped it down in one go. Immediately, His insides started writhing as though he'd just swallowed living snakes. Then a burning sensation spread rapidly from his stomach to the very ends of his fingers and toes. Next, bringing him gasping to all fours, came a horrible melting feeling, as the skin all over his body bubbled like hot wax, and before his eyes, his hands began to grow, the fingers thickened, the knuckles were bulging like bolts, his shoulders stretched painfully, and a prickling on his forehead told him that his hair was creeping down toward his eyebrows. His clothes ripped as his chest expanded like a barrel bursting its hoops, and he began to grow in length. His feet were agony in shoes a few sizes too small. He should have thought of removing his clothes before changing into an adult. After resizing and repairing his clothes, he made sure Sarah had recorded everything. She would still need the data of the transformation back before she could begin improving the potion, but overall the data was promising. His body stats remained the same as the one of the original potion, so it wasn't possible to gain a higher strength by using the hair of stronger people. But it seemed logical, since he also remained a wizard, while he used the hair of a non-magical person. Matthew had now a muscular tall build of a person who worked out regularly. He had brown hair and a fierce-looking face. With his resized dark robes, he looked like an intimidating, dangerous wizard. It was time to visit a place he wanted to visit for a while, but with his child's body, it was too dangerous. Although he was confident he could defend himself and spot sneak attacks with his echolocation, there were just too many shady people like hags, werewolves, or questionable wizards, even vampires, in the place. It was time to visit Nocturne Alley. Chapter 44, Nocturne Alley. Matthew was ready to explore another part of London's magical shopping district, Nocturne Alley, who, like the other parts of the shopping district, was named with a pun. Diagon Alley, the regular shopping part, was named after Diagonally. Horizon Alley, the high-class part of the shopping district, was named after Horizontally. And last but not least, there was the shady part of the district, Nocturne Alley, which held many shops related to the darker and more illegal side of magic and business. That was also implied by its pun nocturnally, which meant nightly or dark. Unfortunately, he didn't possess a Flu network connection at home, since underaged wizards weren't allowed to possess one, which just shows how Muggleborns were discriminated against in the British Wizarding Society. These were just small things, but there are many of them. They also didn't possess a fireplace, so this would also be a problem for a Flu connection. With his disguise, he also couldn't ask his parents to drive him, since he didn't want to explain why he even was disguised. Since he didn't learn to apparate, although he wanted to, he couldn't risk splinching, since there was no way to restore himself in the worst case. So his only choice was his short-range portal magic. The distance between his home and Charing Cross Road, where the entrance to Diagon Alley was located, was over 1 kilometer long. His short-range portal magic only allowed him to cross around half the distance necessary. So he would have to open the portal 2 times. First, he opened a portal to a remote small alley where he last year encountered the drug dealer. After he stepped through the blue rotating hole, he came out behind a big trash container. Nobody was luckily inside the alley. Although he felt confident enough to wipe memories with the observation charm, since he got enough practice last year, he still didn't want to use it too often on innocent people. Next, he once again formed a blue rotating portal with his magic. This time it led to a back street on Charing Cross Road, where the Leaky Cauldron was located. The back street he chose was right beside the Leaky Cauldron, where the anti-muggle charm was still working. So he didn't need to worry about getting spotted by an innocent passerby. Muggleborns and their parents still wouldn't come shopping, since the Hogwarts letters weren't delivered and other magical would either apparate into the backroom of the cauldron or use the flue connection. So Matthew arrived at the leaky cauldron without getting any unwanted attention about his unusual way of magical transportation. He entered into the alley through the main entrance of the cauldron, under the curious gazes of the patrons there. They were probably wondering why he used the entrance to the Muggle world instead of one of the magical ones. But he had no choice in this matter. Next, he passed through the busy alley. Since it was already midday, many people were shopping or working here. He walked until he arrived at a corner of the alley where it was crossing with the shady Nocturne alley. It looked like a dark, twisting alleyway just around the corner of the bright and busy Diagon alley. The entrance was much gloomier in comparison to the entrance to the normal part. Nocturne alley was much barer than Diagon alley. There weren't as many witches and wizards there. Most of them gave off a darker feeling than the inhabitants of Diagon alley. They behaved fairly suspiciously and many hid their faces behind their hoods. Matthew also put the hood of his dark robe over his face and entered the dark alley. At first view, it was a barren alley with many shops, but after taking a closer look at the displays he spotted many dangerous or strange goods. The vendors sold things like shrunken heads, poisonous candles, human-looking fingernails, shady-looking trinkets, and medallions. This place was more dedicated to the dark arts. One of the first shops in the dark alley that piqued Matthew's interest was Mr. Mulpepper's apothecary. Although they also had a shop right next to Slug and Jigger's apothecary as direct competition, their selection there couldn't compare with them. Maybe here it was different since they had the chance to sell more ingredients of a questionable nature. The inside of the shop was quite dark and dirty. It was tended by an ancient-looking wizard with a wrinkled face and an unhealthy greyish color. There were many things on the shelves. Different blood samples of many magical creatures, eyes in glass containers hopefully only of creatures and not humans, and many more questionable products. Matthew bought a selection of different potion ingredients which were harder to get by in normal shops. They would be very useful in his experimentation. He also bought some of the blood samples, since he planned to study the different bloodlines of magical creatures. Although he didn't want to use them to enhance himself at the moment. He felt even if he created a Phoenix Dragon Basilisk hybrid bloodline that he could infuse into himself to strengthen himself, there is something more powerful out there. He also is far from a bottleneck in strengthening himself at the moment. So although preparation and studies wouldn't hurt, there was no need at the moment. On a bottom shelf behind the ancient shopkeeper was a vial with a golden blood-like fluid inside. But no matter how Matthew tried, the shopkeeper wouldn't sell him anything of it. This vial may be the reason for the sign on the front of the shop in the Diagon alley, "We don't sell unicorn blood, don't ask about it." Since the content of the vial suspiciously looked how unicorn blood was described in books. But apparently, the shopkeeper didn't trust him, so he wouldn't sell him anything of the interesting goods. Matthew decided he would shop here more often, to acquire more exotic goods in the future. After returning to the dark alley, he continued with his exploration. He found many interesting shops that he should check out in the future. Shops like Dystyle Phalanges sold many different kinds of bones, human and non-human. Unfortunately, he didn't have the tools to study them properly at the moment, and as potion ingredients, they were mostly too hard to be really useful in this form. Then there were shops like Cobb and Webb's, a shop dedicated to items related to the dark arts in general, or the Coffin House, a shop with dark arts materials, especially necromancy. A topic he had a great interest in, but he first needed a proper hideout to practice stuff like this. Ye Olde Curiosity Shop right next to Cobb and Webb's was also an interesting shop. It sold many curious items related to the dark arts. Maybe he could find an undiscovered treasure there. But first of all, his goal for this trip was the shop right next to it. If he had time later, he would check it out on his way back. The main goal of this trip was a shop every Harry Potter fan was familiar with, a shop located at 13B Nocturne Alley by the name of Borgin and Burke's Antique Shop. This shop was known to deal with many unusual and ancient wizarding artifacts. Not only artifact, but this was also the most likely place where Matthew could find books on topics that weren't available in Hogwarts. This shop was quite a historic place. Behind the dark and gloomy shop front was a place where even Lord Voldemort worked in the past when he was still known as Tom Riddle, probably the only workplace he ever had. Also in the future it would become quite important since it contained many important objects. Among them was the Vanishing Cabinet, a direct entrance to Hogwarts. Chapter 45, Borgin and Burke's. In the front window was an assortment of different artifacts displayed. Amongst them was an opal necklace. This necklace had a read the label, "Do not touch. Cursed. Has claimed the lives of 19 Muggle owners to date." This was the necklace Draco Malfoy bought in the future to kill Dumbledore in Harry's 6th year. Unfortunately, Katie Bell touched it accidentally while delivering it under the Imperious Curse and landed in St. Mungo's for the rest of the year. Matthew entered the gloomy antique shop, which was founded in 1863 by Messrs. Caractacus, Burke and Borgin through the entrance at the front. He entered the store, which was currently empty. It was a large, dimly lit wizard's shop that was quite dusty and dirty. The atmosphere inside the store was quite dark. There was a feeling of dark magic in the air, similar to the ruins of the Black Castle but not quite as powerful. The inside of the store looked similar in age and style to the rest of the wizarding world. There was a large stone fireplace at one side of the shop. Next to it was a glass case that held a withered hand on a cushion, a blood-stained pack of cards, and a staring glass eye. Evil-looking masks stared down from the walls, an assortment of human bones lay upon the counter, and rusty, spiked instruments hung from the ceiling. On the other side was a dusty bookcase full of books on different topics. Beside it stood a large black metallic cabinet. This was the Vanishing Cabinet connected to Hogwarts. It still should be fully functional since Peeves still didn't break the other one by dropping it above Filch's office in one of the classrooms to distract him, which happens in Harry's 2nd year. But Matthew wouldn't try it out since he wasn't sure if it got damaged before that event. Vanishing cabinets were quite popular during the First Wizarding War. It was one of the safest ways to anonymously vanish if Death Eaters should visit. Since it was unaffected by anti-apparition and anti-portkey wards, it was a good escape method. But Matthew wasn't here for the cabinet at the moment. He had enough time to acquire it in the future. First, he approached the glass case and observed its contents. Sarah scanned the objects inside the glass case. He requested mentally while waiting a few moments for the results. According to Sarah, the pack of blood-stained cards was a cursed artifact. Once someone touched them, they would begin to whirl around and attack the person and cut him all over his body. The only stop once the person would run out of blood. The staring glass eye was similar to the Eye of Moody, an enchanted eye that returns the user's vision once implanted. But instead of having the ability to see through objects and walls, it could see magic. Basically, it could see an aura around enchanted objects or a person. Based on the color, the user could discern what kind of magic was on the object or what kind the other person was casting. If it was harmful, it usually took a dark malevolent coloring. Lastly was the withered hand on the cushion. This hand was purchased in the future by Draco Malfoy. This was an artifact called the Hand of Glory, a dark artifact that gave candlelight only to the holder. Although it wasn't a very powerful artifact, it was quite a useful one. It could even shine through most spells and pieces of magic which created darkness, like the veil created by Peruvian instant darkness powder, which was resistant to most light creation spells. Next, Matthew headed to the dusty bookcase and began looking through the collection of different books on the topic of a darker nature. Unfortunately, most of them were available inside the restriction section of the Hogwarts library. Only a few of them he saw for the first time. After picking a total of 3 books that he didn't read yet, he approached the wooden shop counter since the rest of the objects inside the shop was of minor interest to him. Although some of the masks on the wall had a historic value, they weren't really useful for him. He rang the old bell on the counter to call Mr. Borgin to the front of the shop. After a few moments, a stooping man had appeared behind the counter, smoothing his greasy hair back from his face. "Greetings, Mr. Borgin, nice to meet you," greeted Matthew with a polite voice while watching the other man. "Good day yourself, sir. A new customer, that's rare." "What a pleasure to meet you, mister," replied Mr. Borgin with his voice as oily as his hair. "Ah, how discourteous of me, my name is Magus, that's what people at least call me." He introduced himself while quickly making a name up. "I would like to purchase these books here, and would like to know if you have any rare books related to souls, magical constructs, dark magic, rituals, or necromancy for sale," he asked with a quiet and serious voice, making sure he couldn't be overheard from the outside while putting the 3 books he picked earlier on the counter. They were Practical Dark Arts, 100 Ways to Death, and Potent Rituals. Books that weren't available in the Hogwarts library, but something he would be probably able to locate in other stores here in Nocturne Alley. "Oh, I see a knowledgeable customer you are, Mr. Magus. These books are quite uncommon but practical," replied Mr. Borgin while flattering Matthew with his oily voice. "Unfortunately, I don't have any books on magic related to souls. They are quite rare and usually only available to very old families. Even if I gained some, I would first approach other customers since they would guarantee me quite the nice price. As for magical constructs, I don't have any currently since this is quite the exotic form of magic here in Britain, since we prefer transfiguration for similar effects, but I could keep my eyes open for you and contact you. As for the other topics, I have a few interesting books," he answered. "Well, I would be indebted to you if you could keep your eyes open. If you get your hands on any books related to soul magic, I would also pay you handsomely. I will visit your shop in a few months again since I will be traveling for a while and won't be reachable. Please let me have a look at your other books," said Matthew as he stared back at the greasy man while making up some excuses to keep his identity a secret. "Yes, one moment please," replied Mr. Borgin while returning to the back of the store. After a few minutes he returned with a pile of another 4 books. "These are the books that could be quite interesting for you based on your requests." Let me see," muttered Matthew while reading the titles of the books. Cursed Blood was the first book. It seemed to be about blood-based curses. The next one was called Animate the Death. It should be a necromancy book, but based on the title it was a different kind of necromancy Matthew had in mind. He imagined more something like returning life into death bodies, creating zombies, summoning ghosts and spirits. But like Inferni, the necromancy of the wizarding world was more about animated corpses. Next was a book called A Traveler's Diary. He had no idea what that had to do with dark magic, but it may be worth it. Last but not least was a book by the name of Rituals of Thy Body. The title was pretty self-explanatory and something that was definitely useful for Matthew. After checking the collection of books out, he returned his gaze back at Mr. Borgin. "How much for these 7 books together?" he asked while anticipating the reply. Chapter 46, A Strange Stone. To honor our future cooperation, I will give you an exclusive offer of only 500 galleons for these 7 very rare and regulated books, offered the greedy man with his oily voice. This fucking greedy asshole, even if these books are rare at most they would cost around 200 galleons. Thought Matthew as he smiled politely back at the business shark, and replied with a serious but still polite voice, Mr. Borgin, are you trying to cheat me? Although they are quite regulated, I would be able to buy them in other shops here in Nocturne Alley. At most I could offer you 50 galleons. Began Matthew to haggle. 50 galleons? Do you want to rob me, Mr. Magus? We could become good friends in the future, but we need to be fair to each other. How about 400 galleons? Counter-offered the greedy snake, Mr. Borgin. That's more like it, but still far over their value. How about 120 galleons? Replied Matthew, still trying to lower the price. No, I still need to make a bit of profit. How am I supposed to eat if I gift my goods away? 300 galleons is my last offer, offered Mr. Borgin with a glint in his eyes. That's still quite expensive. How about 250 galleons and you add that hand in your glass case to it and we have a deal? I would be then inclined to return for more deals in the future to your nice store, offered Matthew as a last effort. The Hand of Glory, you have picked quite the valuable artifact there, Mr. Magus. But to honor our future business relationship I will have to accept your offer. Accepted Mr. Borgin while faking his unwillingness. After all, he was still making quite the profit here, and the hand wasn't quite as valuable as he pretended. He stretched his hand out. Matthew shook his hand to accept the deal. After paying 250 galleons to Mr. Borgin, he took out his trunk and enlarged it. Meanwhile, Mr. Borgin retrieved the Hand of Glory from the glass case and handed it to Matthew, who put it into his trunk together with his new books. After shrinking his trunk once again and putting it once again away onto his necklace, he left Borgin and Burke's antique shop after saying goodbye to Mr. Borgin. Once again he stepped onto the shady alley. So that's finished, thought Matthew while observing the sky. Well, as expected, it wasn't that easy to gain books on souls. My only hope remains that place. Sarah. How much time has my polyjuice potion left? Asked Matthew, mentally hoping to make another stop. Estimated time remaining, 1 hour 32 minutes. Replied the mechanic voice of the AI inside his mind. Should be enough time, mused Matthew as he headed to the shop next door. He entered the shop named Ye Olde Curiosity Shop, located between Cobb and Webb's and Borgin and Burke's. Inside he found a small room with many different shelves full of different objects of all sizes and shapes. Behind the wooden counter stood a bearded wizard with dark hair who promptly greeted him. Welcome customer, take a look at my goods. If you should have any questions, you can ask me. He began with a grumpy voice, while his eyes stared seriously at Matthew. Thank you. Don't mind me. I will just take a quick look around, answered Matthew politely with a small smile. He began to look through the different shelves inside the store. The store had quite the assortment of different things. There were a lot of goods that looked broken or just plain useless. There were broken brooms, some even with curses on them, on one shelf. Next, he found a collection of different daggers, some of them rusted, on most of them the runes and enchantments already faded. On some of them, he still could pick up remains of the enchantments, which were there to keep the daggers sharp or rust-free. They must be quite old or have gone through quite the fight to end up in such states, since they originally seemed to be of good quality. They were no use to Matthew, since he could just create the enchantments himself if he needed them. Next, he found a shelf with different enchanted clothes. None of them piqued his interest, since they were either plainly cursed to harm the wearer or had a useless enchantment on them. Like putting the wearer's arms into the air on command and silly stuff like that. Then there were some old ones, but Matthew was quite happy with his and didn't need a second one, since he was quite adept in wandless magic. On some shelves were just some broken non-magical objects, like broken TVs, radios, umbrellas, car parts, or other things. One shelf even had just a collection of stones on them. As if to mock the customer. Matthew was prepared to leave the shop disappointed, because he hoped he would find some kind of hidden treasure, but everything was just useless. Until he suddenly heard Sarah inside his head. Beep. Picking up energy readings of a soul inside one of the objects. Right in front of the host. On the upper shelf on the right back side. What did I accidentally stumble on? A Horcrux of someone, thought Matthew while observing the place which Sarah pointed out. It was the shelf with the collection of stones. In the right back corner of the shelf lay a strange-looking stone. It was yellow-white and shaped very strangely. It was multifaceted, made of a few cubes in different sizes but still hanging together. While one side seemed broken off, it had the size of the front of Matthew's thumb. Is this the Horcrux? Wondered Matthew mentally while observing the rock. Yes and no. This is the object which contains a part of a soul. Based on my energy readings, the complete soul should be more powerful than any human wizard. But this doesn't seem to be a Horcrux, more like a power source. More data is needed. The stone is just a small part of an about softball-sized object, answered Sarah while analyzing the stone. It doesn't matter if this is a Horcrux. It should still be useful to study souls, thought Matthew as he picked the strange stone up and brought it to counter where the bearded wizard was waiting for him. After pretending that he was disappointed that he didn't find anything of interest for him, he was able to fool the bearded shopkeeper that he was buying the stone as a decorative ornament. Unlike Mr. Borgin, the bearded shopkeeper didn't try to extort him, and he was able to purchase the strange stone for a few sickles. After putting the stone into his pocket, he left the store and headed back into the alley. It was almost time for him to turn back. He only had about half an hour of his Polyjuice potion effect left. He headed back to Diagon Alley, where he once again dropped his hood, since it would only look suspicious here. He left the alley through the leaky cauldron again and headed back to the back alley. After making sure with a quick hominum revelio that he wasn't followed, he opened once again a blue swirling portal and landed in the drug dealer alley again. From there he jumped once again into his room. A few moments later the effects of his potion began to fade. His body once again began to feel on fire. The bones and muscle began to move back into their original places. His skin was bubbling again while he was shrinking considerably. After a few minutes, he once again was back to his normal form. Now he stood in his room with clothes a few sizes too big for him. He quickly changed into some comfortable clothes and checked if Sarah had enough data to improve the Polyjuice recipe. Beep. Enough data gathered. Ready to make a few improvements. Estimated time needed, 12 hours 52 minutes. Should I continue? Just as he was about to confirm, his body began to feel strange. Sarah, what is happening? Scan my body please," he requested hurriedly. Chapter 47, Early Spiritual Maturation. After a few panicking moments, Matthew heard Sarah's reply inside his mind. Beep. Scan complete. Host's body entered a state of spiritual maturation and is about to break through the bottleneck of host magical energy. The last few months spending in Peak's rank 1 wizard state was enough to loosen the bottleneck, so the host could enter the state earlier than other wizards. The Polyjuice potion was the last straw. The transformation of the potion triggered the early maturation of the host's body and forced the state. The host should place himself in a comfortable state and enter a sleep-like state through meditation, since wizards usually go through this process naturally in their sleep, but the host's circumstances are special thanks to the Azure Corn potion. No data on an early maturation inside the database was found. Starting recording the process. Oh, that's what's happening. Finally, I waited long enough after all, thought Matthew as his body continued to heat up. He quickly hurried to his bed and entered a comfortable lotus position and began to try entering a meditative state. While meditating, the hot feeling spread through his whole body from his head to his toes. He calmed himself down, using his occlumency and corresponding mediation method, and entered his mindscape, which should count as a sleeping state for his body. His consciousness appeared in his mental universe. The colors inside were flashing a lot more intensive and brighter than ever before. There was a wild, colorful storm raging inside his mind. The storm also spread through the whole space until his universe artificial created borders which served as his mental defenses. Shit, if this continues, my occlumency defenses will shatter again, panicked Matthew while observing the raging storm inside his mindscape. I need to do something. This is my mind and my body, and I am the master here, thought Matthew in a fit of rage as he concentrated on the storm. The wild storm of colors kept expanding and pushing against his borders. Matthew decided to try something. Instead of letting it push against his defenses, he tried to feed the overflowing energies of the storm into them, like when he built them. He had the theory that this raging storm was a mental representation of the spiritual maturation his body was undergoing currently, and before it finishes it had a lot of overflowing excess energy, so why not use it to empower his mental defenses further? He raised his hands and willed the energies that were pushing against his defenses to flow into them. Bit for bit the borders of his mental universe became more colorful and brighter. It worked. He was able to use the overflowing energy of his body to strengthen his mind defenses further. After some time that felt like hours, the colorful storm stopped pushing against his mental defenses. Instead, it began to shrink, but not really shrink. It began to get denser and denser. Instead of a white storm, it became a dense flow of energies spread through his whole mindscape. A few minutes later the whole process ended and his mental universe calmed down again. But the whole space changed. Instead of a few flashes of small colorful flashes of lightning inside his universe, they became much stronger and denser and consisted of multiple colors instead of a single one. The strength of his mental defenses also at least doubled, which was an unexpected but welcome boon for him. After Matthew made sure everything was okay, he decided it was time to wake up and leave his mindscape again. He disappeared from his mental universe. A few moments later Matthew, who still sat in a comfortable lotus position on his bed, slowly opened his eyes. It was already dark outside. He returned from Nocturne Alley in the evening, but it was still bright outside then, so at least a few hours should have passed during his artificial spiritual maturation, which the clock in his room confirmed. He made sure everything felt fine inside his body before he began moving. His whole body felt full of energy like never before. Standing in the middle of his room and moving every part of his body, just to make sure everything was fine, he began to mentally communicate with Sarah. "Sarah, did everything go well?" he asked while anticipating the reply of his AI. Beep. "Yes, the host's body seems in better condition than before, although the host has to reapply his brain capacity training spell since it got broken during the process. I recorded the whole process and will analyze the data now. Give me a few minutes, please." "Continue." "Yes, do it, Sarah," he confirmed while beginning to wait. "So my spell broke, that's why my thoughts feel so fast. Damn, I can't wait to see how it will feel when the second stage of my occlumency training is completed," he mused while waiting for Sarah to analyze the data of his first spiritual maturation. After a few minutes, he heard Sarah's mechanical voice again. "Analysis complete. Host's bodies successfully completed an artificial spiritual maturation like any wizard would undergo after a lot of training, aging, or rituals would undergo. When a wizard reaches a bottleneck in his magical energy values, the excess energies will begin to gather in a part of his body while unavailable for usage until it reaches a critical mass or breaking point where it will begin to force the body through a maturation to accommodate more power. This stored energy is different from the energies used in the natural maturation a wizard undergoes twice his life. This energy is naturally gathered in a wizard's soul constantly. It will naturally force a maturation once at 7 where the wizarding child will be then able to control his magic, and a second time at 15 to 16. The host still has the energy storage inside his soul untouched and will mature at around 16 completely naturally. So that's how it works," wondered Matthew while comprehending the new information gathered through the analysis. "I wonder if my early maturation will bring me any unexpected benefits in the future. At least I am now far ahead in magical power compared to most students until their 5th year. I should have reached the level of a 6th-year student now. Sarah, please update my status and show me the new one," he requested while being excited about his new strength. Beep. Stats calculated. Displaying new status. Matthew Mason, Wizard, Rank 2, Strength, 2.5, Agility, 2.6, Vitality, 2.8, Magical Energy, 92.3, Status, Healthy and Energized. My physical stats also got a bit boosted by approximately 0.3. But I finally broke through the bottleneck and my magical energy level rose by over 10 alone through the maturation, and I should be now able to reach a level of around 200 before I would reach a bottleneck again," cheered Matthew internally while checking out his new status. "But that's not all, the energy feels denser and more potent than before. The strengths of my spells should also have risen," concluded Matthew as he felt the energy flowing through his body. "Well, I will have to test my spells tomorrow carefully. If I can my magic again at an appropriate level, I then also should reapply my occlumency training spells again. But first I need to test my control so I don't screw it up and turn myself into a human vegetable," thought Matthew seriously while changing into his pajamas so he could go to sleep. After silently washing himself inside the family bathroom, he quietly sneaked back into his room and entered his bed. A few minutes after closing his eyes, he quickly fell asleep. Although he felt energized, his body was still exhausted from the long day. Chapter 48, Improvement and More. The next day Matthew woke up early in the morning and had a nice breakfast with his parents before they left for work, since he didn't see them the whole day yesterday. After enjoying a nice breakfast prepared by his mother, he was finally alone at home. He changed into some of his workout clothes and entered the garden of their family home. It was time for him to try out the new strength level of his spells. After completing a spiritual maturation, he should have reached a new level. He needs to regain control over his magic and familiarize himself with his new power level. Inside the garden, he approached one of the thick trees, which he would use as his target for spell practice. After all, he didn't have any actual dummies with him, something he should note down to correct in the future. He decided it was best to start with a simple spell so he couldn't do much damage. But a tree was different from a practice dummy. A stinging hex would probably not indicate how strong he had become. The only spells he practiced on trees before were cutting piercing curses and the knockback jinx. He decided it was in his best interest to try the knockback jinx since he couldn't just repair the tree with a mending charm since it was a living thing. His mother would get angry at him if he destroyed their nice and homely garden. The last time he cast a knockback jinx on a tree it barely shook. He decided to first try it out without his wand since it would only make his spells even more powerful. After aiming with his hand he cast Flipendo. And a blue glowing projectile left his hand. It flew fast against the tree, the whole tree began to shake and even moved a few centimeters backward. A lot of leaves dropped from its branches onto the green grass of their garden. "Yeah, don't destroy the garden, my ass," cursed Matthew as he stared at the results of his knockback jinx. "Mom will definitely know someone, most likely I did something to the garden. Ha, damn it. Well, Sarah, can you compare the spell to my old strength level for me?" He requested his AI chip. Beep. Calculation complete. The knockback jinx became 72% stronger than previously recorded attempts. Ha, so my spells became almost 2/3 stronger than before. That's a nice power up for my age. But I will have to learn to control my new power, muttered Matthew while thinking how he should continue. He decided a nice way to become better was to clean up the mess he just did. So he began to practice gathering the leaves with his levitation charms until he was able to do it flawlessly again. After that he tried to vanish them while controlling his power level. It took a few tries to find the appropriate strength level. He mostly held too much back and only vanished a few leaves until he found the right level. After he finished cleaning up he began to practice with different kinds of harmless charms, like the wand lighting charm Lumos or the mist conjuring charm Fumos. He spent the whole morning practicing with simple spells before he prepared a quick lunch for himself. He finished his lunch and returned to the garden. It was time to continue with his wand. After he familiarized himself with his wand again, he moved to more advanced types of magic, like creating portals. The first few tries he failed miserably. They were either too small or in the completely wrong place, but after a while, he once again managed to open portals successfully. Next, he began to try cutting charms on a few leaves of the tree. He would target only single leaves and cut them as precisely as possible from the tree. Once he managed that, he felt he had once again full control of the strength of his magic. As his parents returned from work, they had a nice dinner together. After spending the evening with his parents, he retired to his room. It was time for an important spell. He needed to reapply the training spells on his mind for the second part of his occlumency. He once again carved the isolation formation onto the floor. He had no worries about damaging the floor here since he could easily fix it with the mending charm this time. After all, his floor wasn't alive. Once he finished charging the rune formation, he stepped into the middle of it and sat down in a lotus position and began to relax. Once he felt he was ready, he began to reapply the spell. This time he needed to do it twice since he already completed the first level of the spell. As he cast the spell for a second time, he once again felt a short but stabbing pain in his head, but this time much weaker than before. It was proof that he already completed a large part of the second level. After he applied the spells on himself, he felt that his perception was once again numbed down. Everything felt slower, but he had no problem with controlling his body and walking into things this time. After all, he already trained on this level for a while. Once he got the confirmation that everything was working correctly, he breathed out in relief. Now he was once again continuing his occlumency training. He would have to apply the third level of the spell after he returned to Hogwarts. Matthew was unsure if he should use the Room of Requirements while Kirillmort was inside the castle. After all, he didn't want to cause any unforeseen consequences, like him hiding the Horcrux somewhere else. Matthew had no worries about Kirillmort using Legilimency on him. After all, his occlumency shields were very powerful. And if he should manage to break through them, which he doubted he could in his wraith form, it would be another matter if he had his body back, but as a wraith, he was very weak. But in the end, his memories were still encrypted by Sarah, so nobody who broke into his mind could actually read them. But he had to make sure to prepare a set of nice fake ones so Kirillmort wouldn't get suspicious of him if he even tries to read his mind. But better be safe than sorry. After finishing reapplying the spells on his brain, Matthew began to clean up his room and fix the spell formation on his floor. Once he completed that, he began to prepare for sleep once again, but before that, he gave Sarah a few tasks to complete. Although he finished everything he wanted to accomplish before his Hogwarts shopping list would arrive, which was still a few weeks away, he could still work on some side projects. The first project he decided to work on was improved versions of the Polyjuice potion. He gave Sarah specifications for multiple improved versions. For his personal use, he decided to create 2 different ones. One with a similar effect to the original one but with a faster brewing time and a better taste. The second one is a permanent one with a counter potion to return the user's original form. Secondly, he decided to create an improved formula to sell to Slughorn's apothecary once again. A slightly faster version to create, but not much. Most importantly, it also should be tasteless. He believed this would bolster his passive income massively. Once everything was in order, he cleaned himself up and went to sleep. Since he had the next few days of experimentation before him. After a while, he fell deeply asleep. Chapter 49, Holiday Research. For the next few weeks, Matthew experimented with the Polyjuice potion formula, to create new ones. After experimenting with many different new formulas for days, he finally managed to complete 3 new Polyjuice potion formulas. Well, you could say 4 new formulas, because he additionally designed a counter potion for the permanent one, which actually works for all versions of the potion. It actually was a general antidote for transformations of any kind. In theory, it should also work on Tonk's metamorph Magus transformation. Maybe he would get in the future the chance to see her original form, who knows. This antidote was a very powerful and useful potion. Something he absolutely shouldn't share with the public. If any Death Eater got his hand on the formula, he would lose a very great advantage with his new potions. After all, with his new permanent potion he could permanently take on a new identity, but with the counter potion out there he would need to watch out for what he consumed. He managed to cut down on the costs of the potion and how long it needed to brew, but the difficulty got higher. It was now much harder to brew than before, but it only needs 3 days to complete. But with Sarah's help, he had no troubles in brewing any potions. He alone was already an experienced potioneer at this point. With the assistance of an AI, there was no potion master who could compare with him, at least in brewing. The potion he and Sarah designed to sell had also a few improvements in the brewing process. There was no longer a need to watch the moon cycle and prepare some ingredients a month earlier. It became also cheaper than before and only needed to brew for 3 weeks instead of 4. But most importantly, it had only a good taste, after putting a body part in, and didn't look like mud anymore. Instead, it was colorless and only had a color after the target's hair or something was put in. Once he completed his experiments and made sure everything was fine with them, he prepared some probes of the potion he would sell and a copy of the recipe and visited Sloan in Diagon Alley again. He pretty much got a meeting the day after he contacted him with Morgana's help. Again he made a nice contract with Slugs and Jigger's apothecary for the potion, after Sloan himself certified and registered the potion for him at the ministry. They also directly made a contract with the apothecary and indirectly with him for a constant supply of the potion. Matthew would alone through this deal make 250 galleons a month. Scene break. After successfully completing his potion experiments and a good business deal, the date of the Hogwarts shopping list was moving closer and closer. He decided it was time to take a closer look at the strange stone he acquired in Nocturne Alley, the stone that maybe was Horcrux or at least something similar. With his current level of occlumency, he should be powerful enough to defend himself from any attempts to control himself. He took out the stone and observed it closely, although on first look it looked to be made of stone even with its yellow color. It was another material if you looked closely at it. It had a metallic shine to it and was glittering. Its form was also strange with its multifaceted cubic form. The surface area of the stone was very smooth, but it still had its metallic stone look. First, he tried to scan the stone with his scanning spell which he normally used to read books. After all, it was designed to find the composition of everything he scanned. The result was that the stone was made of a composition of multiple elements. Among them were all the minerals which were part of natural stones, different kinds of metals like gold, iron, silver, titanium, and even rare metals like molybdenum. But the most shocking finding for Matthew is that there were even a few unknown elements inside the stone that shouldn't even possibly exist. Unfortunately, the spell wasn't precise enough to show him the exact atomic model of the different elements, but this was already extremely valuable data for his future research. He may be able to discover new elements with completely new applications in the non-magical and magical worlds. This stone may be a gold mine for his future endeavors. As for the structure and purpose of the stone itself, Sarah concluded it was a magical artifact to store gigantic amounts of power for the user. A level of power unheard of in the wizarding world. This stone probably wasn't a wizard artifact. But according to the Ari's estimations, its creator was still far weaker than the being behind the scroll. All of these were only theoretical conclusions based on the scan itself. Even Sarah wasn't sure since she only had a part of the stone to work with. The whole stone may have a completely other purpose, and this part was only a bit of the energy source. The soul inside the stone was in strength level stronger than any human or wizard soul, but was much smaller. It was such a small piece of the soul that it wasn't conscious. The soul would need more parts of the stone to regain its self-awareness. Which was a welcome result for Matthew, since he now had a powerful soul piece to experiment with and begin his deeper studies into souls. Souls were a topic of major interest for Matthew, even if he managed to gain immortality for his body in the future. The soul would still begin to die after a few thousand years according to his current research results. So he would need to find ways to strengthen his own soul, which would also make his magic more powerful since both of them were directly connected. Matthew would spend the next few days with experiments on the stone, he would use many things to gain further insight into it. Amongst them, he also used the Chaos Runes for different kinds of experiments. He gathered extremely useful data on souls for the next few days. Scene break. Wednesday, the 24th of July, 1991. Today was the day his Hogwarts shopping list should arrive. It was the same day Harry would get his first one, and the Dursleys, especially Mr. Dursley, would go mad until they traveled to the abandoned lighthouse on a small island, where Hagrid would pick up Harry for his first shopping tour through Diagon Alley. As Matthew was sitting with his parent at breakfast in the kitchen of their nice home, and Brown Owl arrived on their kitchen window. "Oh, it seems my Hogwarts shopping list is here!" exclaimed Matthew as he stood up and opened the window. After taking the letter, he gave the school owl a few bits of their bacon before she left. "Do you need us to accompany you for your shopping?" asked his mother as Matthew opened his letter. "No, need Mom. I will make the trip this Saturday myself. You know how wizards are with non-magical people. I will manage it myself," replied Matthew as he began reading. "Okay, that's fine. I will give you some money to exchange again," said his father as he returned to his newspaper. "If you need me to drive you, just tell me." "Thanks to that, but it's a nice walk. I need the movement since I spent a lot of time in my room this holiday. The fresh air will be good for me." He finished the conversation. This time, besides the next grade of the Standard Book of Spells, there were only new books for his runes and arithmancy classes this year. All the other classes used still the same books. He wondered if he would meet many canon characters on Saturday. He was already anticipating his shopping trip as he finished his breakfast. Chapter 50, Golden Trio 1. Saturday, the 27th of July, 1991. After enjoying a nice breakfast with his parents, Matthew got ready and left their family home in Bloomsbury early in the morning. The moment he was out of sight, he looked for an empty place with a simple cast of Homenum Revelio. He made sure he was alone and unobserved. Once again he opened a blue swirling portal and traveled to the back alley of the Leaky Cauldron, with the help of 2 jumps again. His portal traveling method had some advantages compared to apparition and portkeys. For one, he didn't get uncomfortable because he didn't have to force his body through a small wormhole created with magic. And for the second reason, he wasn't trackable with the common wizarding methods. The Ministry and capable wizards had spells to follow wizards through apparition and portkeys. But that was because this traveling method was so common in the wizarding world, and they developed spells for that a long time ago. His portal magic was uncommon if not unknown for them, so they couldn't track him through it and were unable to follow him until they knew of this trump card. Apparition and portkey wards also didn't work on it. Unfortunately, his portal had a far smaller range than the other method, until he found more data or invested a lot of time into the research. He would have to live with this disadvantage. For now, he was completely happy with his method since he did not need more distant travel at the moment, but that would change in the future. So one of his next goals should be at least to study the portkey spell. This was a method that wasn't as risky as apparition since there was no danger of splinching. He arrived at the back alley of the Leaky Cauldron and entered the alley once again through the Muggle entrance. The Leaky Cauldron was filled with people this time. After all, it was once again for the students to do their Hogwarts shopping since their letters arrived this week. First, he shortly visited Gringotts, where he took some wizarding money from his nicely filled vault. Although he wasn't rich, he would be able to live comfortably at the moment with his current income. But for his research, it was far from enough, but it still helped. After his visit to Gringotts, he headed for Slugs and Jigger's apothecary, where he filled his potion ingredients up with materials for classes and his personal research. He always needed at least a basic collection of different ingredients in his trunk for every situation. And his discount helped him to finance it. Next, he visited a second-hand bookstore to take a look if he was able to find any interesting books he didn't read before, or if he found any books with some useful notes in them. After he only found some spell books that he already knew but had some handwritten notes in them, he paid for them and was about to leave the store, as the door opened and a group of redheads entered it. Matthew instantly greeted the twins. "Hey Gred and Forge, nice to see you. How are you holidays?" "Hey, Matthew, nice to see you too. You know how it is. Some pranking here, some preparations for the next year there. But pretty normal," replied the twins in their famous twin speak. Their answer earned them a stern glare of the motherly red-headed women behind there. "Fred and George, I don't want any more letters from school about any of your pranks this year. You should make yourself an example on Percy and focus more on your studies," berated Mrs. Weasley them. "Hello, Mrs. Weasley, nice to meet you. I am Matthew Mason, a friend of the twins. Although I am part of Ravenclaw, we still are good buddies," introduced Matthew himself politely. "Nice to meet you, dear. I hope the twins are not too much trouble for you," replied Mrs. Weasley with a smile. "Not at all. They are actually pretty entertaining. Any you underestimate them too much. They actually must have a big gift for potions and spell creation with all the pranks they created themselves," answered Matthew while praising the twins with the truth before their mother as his eyes fell on the other person that followed them. It was a young red-haired boy that had a bit of dirt on his clothes. "Oh, you must be Ron, Fred, and George's younger brother. Hopefully, we will see each other in Hogwarts this year." "Hello. Yes, I will start in Hogwarts this year," replied Ron in his typical way. "Well, nice to meet you. I think you will enjoy Hogwarts. It was nice to see you all, but I have to continue now since the list of things I have to finish is still long. Bye. See you on the train, guys," said Matthew as he left the store. His next stop was Madame Mackin's Robes for All Occasions, where he bought some new robes for school and new dress robes since he outgrew his last ones, and he once again was invited to Sloane's Yule Ball this year. After putting his newly bought goods into his trunk, he headed for the Quidditch supply store, where he bought the new Nimbus 2000 so he could study the flying enchantments on it this year. Last but not least, he headed for Flourish and Blot's bookstore, where he needed to buy his new school books for this year. As he entered the store, he spotted a girl with light skin, bright brown eyes, lots of bushy brown hair, and rather large front teeth. But she looked pretty cute and would most likely grow up to be a beauty. She was currently trying to convince two adults, based on their clothes non-magical, to buy some more books. This was clearly Hermione Granger, another member of the famous Golden Trio from the Harry Potter books, and her parents. Matthew approached Hermione and her parents and introduced himself. "Hello, nice to meet you. You must be a new Hogwarts student. My name is Matthew Mason. I am this year a third-year student in Hogwarts." "Hello, I am Hermione Granger and a first-year student. And these are my parents, Dan and Emma Granger. What do you want from us?" She introduced herself with a slightly bossy tone, but you could see that she was actually nervous. "Good day to you too, Mr. and Mrs. Granger. You are probably non-magical based on your clothes and Hermione's interest in so many basic books. I would like to recommend you some books that are extremely useful for first-generation wizards," explained Matthew as he continued the conversation. He explained the general situation of the wizarding world to the Grangers and recommended them some books that would help especially Hermione with the customs of the wizarding world, since she was basically entering and studying in another country with different customs. He explained all the things his parents would have liked to know. He spent a good while with the Grangers in the bookstore before he needed to complete his own shopping, so that's all you need to know at the moment. Since you like books so much, Hermione, you really would fit into Ravenclaw. We even have our own library and the older students study with the younger ones once a week. You would make many friends there. He explained as he tried to recruit her. But Professor McGonagall said that Gryffindor was the best house in Hogwarts. Even Professor Dumbledore attended there, and he is the current greatest wizard, replied Hermione. Ha ha ha, that is so typical for Professor McGonagall. She always tries to recruit the promising students into her own house. Although Professor Dumbledore was in Gryffindor, he would have fitted into all houses, and there are many, I would even say more famous wizards in other houses. Many of the prominent figures in the ministry and even most ministers were, for example, in Hufflepuff. While Ravenclaw had many inventors in it. For example, the Floo powder network was invented by a Ravenclaw, and our head of house was even an unbeaten dueling champion. And Merlin himself was a Slytherin. So every house has its redeeming qualities and prominent figures, but the greatest disadvantage in Gryffindor for you is their students. They are rather loud and enjoy more trouble. It is rather hard to find a quiet place to study or read there, since most of them will rather want to do something else. But I am sure you will just find the place where you fit. Finished Matthew. You are right, I will see where I land, since I don't even know where I will be sorted yet or how. Could you tell me? She asked while trying to make puppy eyes. Ha ha, sorry, no. This is a surprise for every new student and nobody will tell you. Well, I have to go now. Don't be a stranger no matter in which house you land. After all, we are friends now, replied Matthew as he began to leave. Yes, we are friends. See you in Hogwarts, said Hermione with a beautiful and happy smile as she watched him leave, becoming Hermione's first real friend. Check, thought Matthew, as he left the store and headed for the exit of the alley. That's it, guys. Hope you like the video. Like, share and subscribe the channel. Also tell me in the comments what you want to see next and if you have any recommendations.